My drash is called this morning, The Choices We Face. Because as we open the Parsha, what do we see? The offer of a choice. I'm going to ask you a question. Do you have a difficulty with choices? Do you ever agonize over a decision? You ever find yourself in a place like that, where you're just kind of really questioning what you should do? Sometimes maybe you're wondering about the implications of your decision, which direction you should go. If I go this way, I go the other way. I'm always picturing Tevye. On one hand, on the other hand. And that's me a lot of times. If that's happening with you, don't worry, you're in good company. That just means you're human. You're a normal, responsible human being who is looking to make good decisions. Baruchim Abayim, welcome. That's okay. We're all like this. In Deuteronomy chapter 11, we read in verse 17, our reading begins, Re'ei anochi noten lifanechem hayom v'racha u'klala. See, I set before you today blessing and curse. Now, someone would look at this and they would say, blessing and curse, what's so difficult to choose? The choice is obvious. How could you have any kind of struggle with that one? Well, yes, the choice is obvious and clear if you can actually see it clearly. Because you see, Re'eh continues on this theme of choosing between obedience and disobedience that actually we were reading about in last week in Ekev. And Hashem is telling Israel, Re'eh, see the choices that are before you. Well, why is he telling us to see? Well, Hashem perhaps is telling us to see because what we encounter, a lot of times, we don't see. It is not that clear. It is not that simple. The options are not always obvious to us. We have to look below the surface, beyond the simple understanding of what's in front of us, because the implications could be far-reaching. So seeing, by the way, doesn't just mean seeing. It means perceiving that there's a different and divergent path out there, that there's different options, and they're not all the same, and they don't all lead to the same direction, and by the way, they're not random, and they're not by chance, because Hashem gives us these very distinct possibilities. Now, some options might lead us away from God. We have to be able to see those options. Seeing also means understanding. Understanding the choices that will lead to results. They will lead to consequences. They may lead us to new circumstances. They may actually lead us to even more complicated choices. How about that? Choices that lead us to other choices. See, seeing also means realizing that not making a choice is also a choice. Seeing is much more than just being able to make out a shape or an image. This is what Hashem says when he says, see what I've set before you. Blessing and a curse. Simple, right? Well, I'm going to ask you a question. What is a blessing and what is a curse? Everybody knows these terms, right? We use them all the time. Well, what if I gave you a piece of paper right now and said in 30 seconds, here's paper, here's markers, in 30 seconds, would you please draw a blessing for me? And then go ahead and draw a curse too. And then I'm going to collect those pieces of paper, shuffle them around, and randomly pass them around the room. And see if the person sitting next to you who gets a random piece of paper from somebody else in this room is going to be able to tell me that the picture that they're looking at is a picture of a blessing or a curse of what is actually at all in this picture. Now, artistic ability are just notwithstanding. I'm not talking about that. Some of us draw well, some of us may not. That's not my point. My point is that sometimes what we look at, it is not so easy to tell. Even simple things like blessing and curse. And we should know, right? Because we use these words all the time. Now, it will be very helpful if the person who actually drew the picture would sit next to us and explain it to us, right? That would be most helpful. Then we're in good company. Then we can understand. Now, all of this I'm trying to say is that Israel, when they were standing in the wilderness at that place of about to enter the land of promise, they had some very limited choices in the wilderness, but what they're about to jump into is going to give them an unlimited array of very difficult decisions to make. They're about to be overwhelmed Sometimes we may feel like this too. Because you know what? This is, for them, is like a moment of a teenager going off to college, okay, for the first time. It's the ability to stay up late at night and do whatever you want, listen to music and blast it as loud as you want without people telling you to stop and be quiet. Never hearing lights out because you're on your own schedule now. You set the clocks. Eating all the junk food you want, and perhaps avoiding doing laundry for as long as you possibly can stand. Okay, fill in your own examples if you'd like to. There's a myriad of untested freedoms that usually people fall into. Okay, these are all choices that most of us sitting in this room, I hope, have learned how to make. And those are the easy ones. Why? Because we've made them wrong a couple of times and we figured it out. So, like a teenager who just got a driver's license and a credit card with a substantial limit, Israel is standing at the threshold of some very difficult decisions about to embark on a world of decisions that can cost them dearly. That's what we're seeing in this parsha, and that's why Moshe says the words that he says. See, look at the choices that were set before you. Because you know what? That means on this path they will encounter some really disturbing and tempting things they probably have never seen in the wilderness. Think about it. Their choices were limited. They will discover people and the ways of life they never knew existed. They will be exposed to some spiritual ideas they have never heard in their life. They will feel lost and sometimes confused by the possibilities and the options that are before them. Now, those choices were not before them before, but now they are. So how? How can they be guided? I believe Hashem offers us guidance right there in the verses of the Parsha, right in the very beginning. There's a very clear direction, but we have to be able to see it. And then, by the way, you know, these things, they apply not just to people who are trying to figure out how to live life, but they apply to those of us who are a little bit more mature and maybe are not pushing on our limits and myriads of new choices that we have just discovered. It works for mature people too. And this is the advice. It will take faith to get to the blessing. Remember, we're standing right before blessing. And by faith, my friends, I don't mean belief, I mean action. That's what it's going to take. Right there in verse 28 in our Parsha, God says, Et chavracha asher tishmu el mitzvot Adonai Elohecha. Blessing if you obey the commandments of the Lord your God. That's what we want, right? We want blessing. If you obey. Tishmu. You hear that word? That's word to hear or to listen. Shema Yisrael, we say it all the time. You hear that word? Tishmu. The secret is right there. To perceive, to understand, to realize, as we talked about, to see for real. The right choices, we first have to hear Hashem. We have to listen to what He says and actually obey it. The things that He's taught us, we have to do them. That's how we come into the right choices. The very pattern that Hashem has given us, the commandments, the mitzvot, is a pattern. It's a way of life. And if you choose to practice this way of life, all of a sudden, the choices that may seem overwhelming and confusing will all of a sudden become clear because you know what? You've been following the right pattern all along. Hashem has given you lots of good choices to make. So while we're struggling with some of the ones that are difficult, the key is to be guided by the commandments and just live the lifestyle. Because the pattern will reveal, we will recognize the right path to go because we have been following that path. You know, the sages say, Pirkei Avot, mitzvah gegeret mitzvah. One mitzvah leads to another. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. Torah is a pattern. Once you set your path on that way, you will be guided even through the most difficult decisions. And if we're not quite there yet, you know what? There are people all around you who are following on a similar path. You, by the way, as we read in these verses, is all in plural. It's not speaking to you individually. It's speaking to all of us because we're in this together. So I pray, may we learn how to see and may we learn how to listen together. so that we can face the choices that we have to face with confidence. Shabbat Shalom.